today to speak to you about the development of indicators on lifelong learning. And in particular, what I'm going to tell you about is my personal narrative, my personal work within the European Commission on this topic, to give you some insight and feel for the development of indicators, and also explain to you a little bit about some of the indicators which I've been involved in developing. So let's see if this machine works. Yeah. Okay, so this is how the presentation is based. I'm going to look a bit at the Lisbon process, which I guess a few of you might be aware of. This was the process which started in 2000 in the European Union, and I won't say too much now. And then I'm going to give you a selection, a taste of the indicators that I worked on, particularly in the areas of active citizenship, lifelong learning, and learning to learn. Then I'm going to reflect a bit on the reality in 2010, what happened in Europe, where did we get to on all these indicators and benchmarks, and finally to close with reflection on this and looking forward to the future and the future indicators towards 2020, the new indicators and benchmarks. And I realize that not many of you can understand what's on the slides up here, so it's more for the translators and for me, but later on we'll have some nice pictures, and therefore that it doesn't matter what language they're written in. Okay, so we go to the beginning. And we go back to a totally different time in Europe when all the heads of states across the European Union came together with a belief that, and a much repeated mantra, that Europe was going to be the most competitive and dynamic knowledge-based economy. And with all these things to do with jobs, growth, and social cohesion. You can imagine them standing. This is the tower in Portugal, in Lisbon. And you can imagine the heads of state standing there looking out to see this bright future which they believed in. But what was incredibly important about this, even if it looks a harsh reality away from where we are now, is that it was the first time that at a European level that they had decided to put knowledge at really the heart of European policymaking. So it was the first time that they recognized that knowledge, education, lifelong learning was actually really important. So whatever we think about the fact that the vision may not have actually arrived at, this was still a very important step for the education field. Okay, so what happened as a result? At Lisbon, they also introduced a new policy process. And this new policy process meant that areas which the European Commission or European Union didn't have competence for, it meant that Europe could still make policies, but it was more an intergovernmental process rather than a top-down process of governance. And the idea of this was to create common objectives which all the different member states agreed to in advance. So it was a way of discussing, coming together and thinking, what do we want to do together? What are our aims? And then this policy process allowed for a soft government way of evaluating it by producing indicators and benchmarks for monitoring how countries were coming to these common objectives. It also introduced the idea then of sharing good practice, so all different countries across Europe coming together and sharing the policies which were most effective in going towards these common aims. Okay, so there were, at this point then, now we're in 2002, in Barcelona, then the European Council, but this time it was given by the Education Council, so that's where all the ministries from the different countries come together. And they decided on these objectives, which was then given to the European Council. Okay. So their three main objectives for 2010 were to improve the quality and effectiveness of education and training. Secondly, and very important to this meeting, they believed that it was necessary to make lifelong learning accessible to everybody. So not just those who are the most able with the most resources becoming more able and more resources, but actually everybody having the opportunity to engage in lifelong learning. And also, which I have to say is not very much happened in the UK, is that education and training should look outwards to the rest of the world, but also outwards in terms of within Europe. So this was the three principles which governed the whole development of policy and processes on lifelong learning from 2002 onwards. And they created a number of benchmarks. So this means all the European countries agreed that these are the achievements that should be arrived at by 2010. Now, you'll know better if this is a reality here in the Basque country, but these are the ones that I'm going to tell you about. So, first of all, there should be no more than 10% of early school leavers. Next, that there should be an increase in the number of math, science, and technology graduates by at least 15%, whilst increasing the gender balance so more women participated in this field. They said that at least 85% of 22-year-olds should have completed upper secondary education, whilst the percentage of low-achieving 15-year-olds in reading literacy should decrease by 20%. And what they decided was that the participation rates of adults in lifelong learning should be 12.5% or more of the adult working age population. So these were what was set out as the vision and the goals for 2010. So what happened next is, in fact, there was a wide number of expert groups who came together to discuss different parts of European education policy in order to achieve these objectives. There was one on key competencies, which was highly successful, but there's one which is still going, and that's called the Standing Group on Indicators and Benchmarks. And these are where experts from all the member states and representatives from the ministries come together to decide upon these indicators and to look at the reporting mechanisms. And since 2004, then there has been a report from the Commission each year on the progress towards the indicators and benchmarks. And also there is a policy one, which is developed by the Education Council and the Commission together, which also looks at achievements. Okay, then we go to something which is quite important for myself. This is where we developed a new centre, the Centre for Research on Lifelong Learning, inside the European Commission. And this was in 2005. And this was to support the conceptual and the technical development of indicators and benchmarks. And the areas which were requested for new indicators at this point was active citizenship, learning to learn, and language learning. And in this presentation today, I focus on the first two because these are the ones that I was more involved with. In 2007, then they decided, okay, we've moved along so far from 2000 that we need to bring a new coherent framework of indicators and benchmarks and perhaps to reframe things a little bit from the period of 2000, realizing that those original indicators perhaps might not be so successful. Anyway, I don't know to what extent you're able to read this up here, but the indicators which I was working on were to do with key competencies. And by key competencies, we're referring to not just knowledge and skills, but values and attitudes. And in the context of citizenship, so the knowledge, skills, values and attitudes needed to become an active citizen. And in the context of learning to learn, it's the knowledge, skills, values and attitudes needed to become a lifelong learner. and to develop the competence for lifelong learning. So these were the two areas which I'm going to speak to you a little bit now in order that you can get an idea of some of the indicators. Okay. So in the field of active citizenship then, we had a research network and the European Commission expert group full of representatives from the member states. And we produced 3 composite indicators. The first indicator that we produced was an indicator of adult participation in active citizenship. So looking at participation in political life, but also in NGOs and associations, and also in the community in terms of helping others and supporting other people in a more informal way and volunteering. And we also had another dimension which was on values of intercultural understanding and human rights. And what we found there was a difference between a two-speed Europe, let's say, that North and West Europe were much higher in terms of the rates of participation, with South and East Europe participating much less. We also have built 2 indicators on young people's knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes for participation. And here we see a very different picture. We first completed these indicators in 1999, but I'm going to show you 2 slides from the more recent study using the IEA International Civic and Citizenship Study. Okay, so this slide here shows you part of the composite which was on social justice. So this included questions to do with gender equality, whether young people agreed strongly or disagreed strongly to fair, equal participation in the labour market and in politics. And also to do with migrants, whether they should be allowed equal possibilities to participate in the politics and in the labour market, and also questions to do with tolerance.